And we're live.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. I will ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest. I'm not aware of any, but if at some point throughout the meeting you find that you do, please declare it at that time. A regular meeting of council minutes from May 25th. If I can have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kinney and Councillor Foster resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held May 25th, 2021 are hereby adopted as circulated. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Deputations, presentations, petitions, and public meetings. We have Mr. Jay Anstey from Baker Tilly and Ms. Jocelyn Lee, our treasurer. So we will ask them to join us, and they will be presenting the 2020 audited financial statements. Wow, that's quite the background, Jay.
I didn't think I had that on there, but
that's okay.
It's the Baker Tilly theme, so it works.
Good morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jocelyn, did you want me to start this morning?
Yes, thank you, Jay. If you would begin.
So I will share my screen, if you'll bear with me for a moment here. And as Mayor Byfoltry mentioned, we are here to present the 2020 audited financial statements and the result of the audit. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jay Anstey. I'm a partner with Baker Tilly. I've been the partner in charge of this audit for the 5 years I've been a partner, and well over a decade that I've been working with the town of Wasaga Beach. I'll jump right into the audit results. So as I mentioned, we're here presenting the 2020 audited financial statements. There in draft form for this meeting with the anticipation of council approving these financial statements today. The audit of the financial statements has an unqualified audit report, as in prior years, meaning that throughout our audit, we determine that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, that they're fairly presented within public sector accounting standards. As part of our audit, we do issue 2 letters, management letters, where we would report on any significant internal control deficiencies, which there were none found during the interim or year-end audits. In addition to these letters, we do prepare and have submitted an audit reporting letter, which goes over items such as independence, significant accounting policies or accounting policy selection. And this audit reporting letter, again, does report there are no significant items to report to council. In addition to the financial statement audit, we also do a separate audit engagement where we review the investment policy and ensure that the town is in compliance with its own investment policy. And we have issued a clean report that all of the investment activities are within the policy. And then also the town is the custodian for cemetery trust funds. And so under the Cemeteries Act, we do a separate audit on those financial statements, and again have issued a clean audit report along with those financial statements. I always like to mention what an audit is and isn't, and at a high level, but have included a little bit more detail this year on what we actually do during an audit. This is an audit of the financial statements of the town. This is not an audit of every individual transaction. We're overall concluding that the financial statements are prepared as a whole. They're materially and fairly presented. In order to get there, there's 2 stages to the audit. There's the interim audit and the year-end audit. During the interim audit, we're actually on site this year. It was the only municipal audit that we were actually on site for, which does make things easier, because during this part of the audit, this is where we're getting an understanding of the procedures and policies that are in place at the town. And of course, we've been the auditors for a number of years, and we have a good understanding of the various transactions that municipalities in general and the town of Wasaga Beach does undertake. So we do look at the various transactions. We have an understanding of all of the types of transactions, but each year we cycle through and we look at particular areas based on any changes in processes, higher risk areas, things that we just haven't looked at in recent years, we do cycle through. So just as an example of what we do look at, so in 2020, we looked at water and wastewater billings, which is a pretty standard practice for this town and any town, but we go from we call it a cradle to grave, and look from the time the meter is read through to the billing to the collection, and make sure that there are proper policies and procedures in place, that the appropriate people are signing off on the meter read, on the cash collection. Similar for the building department. We've looked at whether, in particular with building department, comes additional charges like development charges, and making sure the appropriate charges are applied. So that's in the revenue stream. In the expenditure stream, this year we did look at a standard purchase and making sure that the appropriate check signer was in place and appropriate invoice approval. A capital acquisition we looked at, in particular this year we looked at, it was actually the end of 2019, but it was the arena and library land acquisition. So we did look at that transaction. Generally, when we're looking at capital transactions, we're looking at them within the procurement policy. Land does fall outside of the procurement policy. That is specifically, it's a unique transaction, so it doesn't follow the standard tenders or RFP type of process, but the acquisition was, it followed the process fairly closely anyways, in addition to the proper approvals, again, being in place, delegated authority to the appropriate personnel, and it was in accordance with the requirements of the Municipal Act. Another example of a test that we did was an over budget project. So again, a capital project. We looked at the classroom renovation project. Here we are specifically looking for, if a project is over budget, did it go through the appropriate approval process? Did it go to council so that it was approved ahead of time before the expenditures were incurred, which it did. And then in addition, this one was a unique one. It actually met the threshold for the RFP and tender process, or not RFP, but council did approve to expedite the process to use the informal quotation method, which was presented by staff to council and approved. As far as payroll testing, we did test salary, hourly, and firefighter employee pay. Again, all of those types of transactions have different types of approvals and required processes. On the salary, we actually looked at specifically a personnel in the finance department because they do have custodial duties over payroll. So we want to make sure that they're being treated the same as all other employees. Again, found no issues there. And firefighter pay is tested separately. There's a separate union contract for firefighters. Again, different processes, but everything was in accordance with standard practice and within the policies that are approved. And then finally, for interim audit procedures, we review minutes and bylaws, and for this purpose, we're always comparing budget to actual. Did what actually happen, was it budgeted? And if it wasn't budgeted, did council approve it? So, and this is more in anticipation for our year-end testing to know what we should be looking for at year-end to make sure that those final balances had been approved throughout the year. This then brings us to our year-end audit, and we did this remotely this year. It was done remotely for all of our municipalities because we were in a lockdown period through COVID. This is my first municipal 2020 audited financial statement presentation as usual. And the process does just work very well because we have a good relationship with Treasury and Treasury is very strong, that they know what we're looking for and what we're going to ask. Not to say that we don't ask for additional information just to keep Treasury on their toes, but they prepare a really good set of working papers, reconciliations, and I can't speak strongly enough of Jocelyn and her team there. The reconciliations work out really nice, and it's collaborative too, that we go back and forth and try to improve on the reporting. Jocelyn and I have worked pretty proudly on note 17 to make sure that what she's reporting internally lines up with what we're reporting externally, and that there's a way to reconcile between the two balances because there are different policies in between the two reporting requirements. So at year end, this is where we're actually taking the, for example, the bank. We're looking at the bank statements and ensuring what the bank statements say is what's reported to on the financial statements. We're taking all of those figures and corroborating them to some type of third-party evidence. So, and that's what gets us to the ending financial statement result. So I know a little bit more detail than I usually give, but just want to let council know and the public know what an audit, what the types of procedures we do, and what it is, and again what it isn't. We're not looking at every single transaction. We're looking at material transactions. We're testing samples. Hope that provides some clarity on this year's transactions. Oh, sorry, audit procedures. Turning to this year's actual transactions, this is a snippet of the 2020 Consolidated Statement of Operations, so the activity throughout 2020. And at a high level, starting with operating revenues of $40.7 million. Compared to budget, we're $465,000 over budget in operating revenues in 2020. You'd expect in a COVID year, maybe operating revenues would have been lower than budget, and some departments were down. We saw the rec department was $190,000 below anticipated revenue because we're closed, we're locked down, recreation programs didn't happen. Rental income was down. Obviously, some of the rental facilities that were going to go on, in particular the beachfront, the revenue was down there. But there were other areas that were up in revenue. The planning department was up, lots of planning activity going on through the town of Wasaga Beach. Building permit revenue was up $225,000. Not all of this gets recognized in revenue, and I'll mention this in the obligatory reserve fund. Some of the surplus in the building department has to be deferred, but again, building activity well up over budget through 2020. And then also water and sewer revenue was $500,000 over budget. This is simply due to consumption, and it's a very difficult thing to budget how much water is going to be consumed in the next year, just obviously weather dependent and the activities of the users. And then the one other thing that did cause operating revenues to be over budget was the COVID grant. About $800,000 was received. $240,000 of this has been recognized in that operating revenues line. The rest of it has been deferred. It's in obligatory reserve funds for use in a future year. And then moving to operating expenses of $39 million, they're below budget by about $2.6 million. Most departments were below budget, and one of the reasons being with COVID and some reduced staffing levels, in particular summer students, some hires that didn't happen, minor layoffs. The changes in activity, they are outlined in note 20 to the financial statements. There's a COVID note, but if for whoever's been following along, obviously with council understands the changes that have happened through the 2020 year with COVID. So most departments being below budget. One department that was over budget for the 2020 year is the protection to persons and property, which does include firefighters and planning. And those things, the firefighters had some retroactive pay with the new agreement, and then inspection services, obviously, as I mentioned before, there's increased planning activity, so there's increased costs that go along with that. This brings us down to our net revenue or expenses on the budget line of $1.3 million for 2020. And one thing to note, the budget net expenses is showing $1.7 million budgeted operating deficit, which council might say, wait a minute, we didn't approve a deficit, so we didn't budget for a deficit. Operating expenses on the financial statement do include amortization expense of $7.1 million. So the figures here in the budget column, the operating expenses are $7.1 million higher than council budgeted, and that brings the net revenue or net expenses down into a deficit position. So that's just to line up the results of actual financial statement results to council budget plus factoring in amortization, which it's mixed. A lot of municipalities aren't budgeting for amortization yet, and some are. So it's a pretty standard practice depending on whether it is included in the approved council budget. In terms of the net revenues of $1.3 million, again, this is for external financial reporting requirements. And again, Jocelyn and I have worked hard on note 17 that tries to reconcile this. If you're going to look at the annual surplus, we like to draw your attention to note 17 and the $1.8 million that was ultimately transferred to reserve. But for external reporting purposes, $1.3 million was from operations, the annual surplus. Capital and other revenues, budget of $20 million. This includes capital projects, which may carry over multiple years. So there's not a big concern that the town budgeted $20 million, but only $8.7 million was received or recognized through 2020. It just depends on the timing of capital projects. The revenues that are recognized in there are largely development charges. So as capital projects are undertaken, for example, the Main Street Bridge, any development charges that have been received either in prior years or the 2020 year as the expenditure occurs, then the capital revenue is recognized. Also included in the other revenue section there, it's not a capital revenue, is the income from the government business enterprise from the GeoSands shareholding, which I will get into later in my presentation. And finally, on the statement of operations, the bottom line, the annual surplus is $10.1 million. And again, this is external reporting requirements, and I would strongly encourage anyone to refer to note 17, which does report an overall $1.8 million surplus transferred to reserves at the end of the year. And I would refer people as well to Jocelyn Lee's, the Treasurer's report of March 11th, and then her report today should add some clarity to where this $1.8 million surplus does come into play. Looking at revenues in a little bit different light here, we're looking at it by the source of revenue and how much of a percentage makes up the town's revenue by that source. So obviously the main source for Wasaga Beach and all municipalities really is the property taxation makes up 63% of the revenue in 2020. And user charges being the next most, those mainly being the water and sewer revenue make up a good chunk of that at 23.5%. The town of Wasaga Beach is on the higher end of the range that we do see in surrounding municipalities. It's kind of in the 59 to 63%. So it is on the higher end of the range that property tax makes up the percent of where the revenue comes from. Then looking at the expenses by department, where the money is actually being spent, the majority of money is spent at, I shouldn't say the majority, the largest portion goes to protection services at 28.5% in 2020. And this does make up some of the bigger areas, those being the police, firefighters, and then it does include bylaw as well. One area I would like to point out is the general government section of 5.6% of the expenses are going to general government. This is definitely on the low end compared to some neighboring municipalities. Neighboring municipalities spend anywhere from 9 to up to as high as in the high teens on general government, whereas the town of Wasaga Beach is fairly low in this, is definitely the low end on where money is being spent by department. Now getting into the ending financial position as of the end of 2020. So the following slides are from the statement of financial position. Starting with cash, short-term investments and portfolio investments. And these are all, I like to look at them all as one group of $69 million, a $5.8 million increase year over year. So the cash and investments balance, another strong increase. And a very, very strong high position compared to neighboring municipalities and the province as a whole. If we look at it in terms of how much cash and liquid cash we have to cover liabilities, the town could cover its liabilities 5 times over. So very healthy cash balances. Another thing I like to look at is that the $69 million in cash and investments, it could cover the obligatory reserve funds of $24 million, as well as all of the reserve funds of about $42 million. And I'll get into those later in my presentation. But this is unusual for any municipality that it has that much cash. A lot of times these balances build up, but then cash is spent on other areas. So there's not actually physical assets to back those balances up. So very strong, healthy position that the town of Wasaga Beach finds itself with the liquid assets here. The investment in government business enterprise, again, this is the shares in Geosands, and I always like to report directly to council. We are the auditors for those organizations, but I like to present separately how it impacts the town. Very similar results year over year on what the town actually received in cash, and the cash received was the interest of $135,000. That's a loan between the town and Wasaga Distribution Inc. that the Wasaga Distribution pays interest to the town, as well as Geosands declared and paid a dividend of $390,000 to the town in 2020. So fairly comparable to prior years, 366 last year. It's typically been in the $400,000 range. The increase in investment in government business enterprise of $163,000. This is the remaining net income of the underlying entities that wasn't paid out in dividends, essentially. So $163,000 compared to $531,000 of 2019. So indicates a lower overall net income of the underlying entities. Moving on to the liability side of the statement of financial position, deferred revenue under the obligatory reserve funds of $24 million, a $1.7 million increase over 2019. There were $6.8 million of development charges and government grants used throughout 2020. So obligatory reserve funds are generally money collected that has to be spent on a specific purpose. So it gets set up as a liability on the financial statements until it's used for that purpose. So for example, development charges are collected under the Development Charges Act and then all of the DC studies that are done and spent. So this year, again, the Main Street Bridge, there was a considerable amount spent on that project. So $6.8 million were used, but there was $5.7 million in development charges collected, as well as $2.4 million in government grants received through the year. Again, I mentioned earlier, the Building Code Act does govern that any surpluses of the building department in a year have to be transferred to reserves. So you do see the increase there because there was high building department revenue and not as many expenditures, so the surplus is transferred here until it is used. Long-term debt of $13.1 million. This is comprised of 4 loans. 3 were existing at the start of 2020, 2 of them being for the beachfront properties and 1 for streetlight retrofitting of previous years. There was 1 new debenture received during the year, and that was $520,000 for a new fire pumper truck. There were $790,000 in debt repayment, principal repayment, as well as $413,000 in interest payments during the year. So $1.2 million was spent on debt in 2020. In terms of that compared to the town's own source of revenue, so property tax and user charges, it's 3% of the amount collected through the year was spent on debt. 3% of the town's revenue went towards debt charges. As this graph indicates, 5% would be considered, anything below that is considered low risk. So the town is in a low risk position as of the end of 2020. Another thing that the ministry does look at is the annual repayment limit, and what it sets the limit at throughout the year. They would not want the town to spend more than $7.4 million on debt. And as I mentioned, the town spent $1.2 million. So it's at 16% of capacity of the annual repayment limit. Note 21 does disclose that there was additional financing that was agreed to subsequent to year end. And that's a construction loan that is available up to $36.5 million. So not committed to, but the town can draw up to $36.5 million on debt. So that will be factored into future year repayments and the annual repayment limit. Now, of course, the terms, since it's a revolving loan and the repayment terms have not been set, but the term of repayment, being whether it's over 25 years repayment or 40 years repayment, as well as the interest rate of the day, is obviously going to impact how it plays into those annual repayment limits, or whether your debt servicing costs are a higher percentage of your total revenue. So that's a decision for staff to recommend to council, and obviously council to make for the council of the day. But just as a where that could be, if typically with IO debt, Infrastructure Ontario, we see terms, minimum terms, kind of around the 25-year range. And if that cost did come into play, we would see about $1.4 million added to the annual debt cost, and that's in principal and interest repayments, which really, when you look at the $7.4 million repayment limit, we're under halfway there on what the town would be able to take out in debt. So again, these are all things to be determined, but the town is well within its capacity limits by taking on this additional $36.5 million of available debt. The net financial assets of the town, these are, if you're going to look at the overall financial position of the town at a high level, and the financial health of the town, this is a good line to look at if you want to zero in on one. So the total financial assets, these are cash or anything that's going to be converted to cash. So taxes receivable, water and sewer balances receivable for billings that just haven't been collected, those investments that I referred to. And then total liabilities, and these are all liabilities, including standard accounts payable, long-term debt, the obligatory reserve funds. But if you were to collect all of the assets, all of those receivables, and pay off all the town's debts, there would be still $46 million in cash available for the town. So this is a very strong position. Again, this graph is any indicator, the town is 131% of financial assets over liabilities, and the provincial average is 20%. So a very strong financial position. Tangible capital assets is the last line I'll refer to on the statement of financial position of $258 million. And again, these are your roads, your bridges, your buildings, any long-term assets that the town does own. There were a total of $15 million spent on capital assets through 2020. And this is offset by amortization expense of $7.1 million. So that's the systematic depreciation over the assets' useful lives. If we look at the assets, how much have been depreciated as a whole, 30% of the assets' useful lives of the town of Wasaga Beach have been used up. And the ministry would like to see below 50%. So again, the town's investment in infrastructure is showing that it's maintaining the health of its assets. Of course, there are individual assets that need to be replaced on a replacement plan, but on average as a whole, the town's the asset life cycle is well within the low risk range. In terms of where the money, the $15 million was spent through 2020, you'll see $8.8 million was spent on its construction in progress category. And these are all just projects that are, as it says, they're still in progress. So look at Main Street Bridge, the Veterans Road trunk line, some Trillium Creek water and land improvement upgrades. So you'll see that that's all in construction in progress. So lots still being worked on and carried into the 2021 budget. This brings us to the accumulated surplus of $305 million. Always say accumulated surplus is not the town's overall financial position. It is not assets and not cash in the bank. And the majority of this is made up of what is invested in the town's infrastructure, the land and buildings, those tangible capital assets. $245 million is the amount net of any debt that's related to those capital assets. Also included in the accumulated surplus is investment in government business enterprise, so the carrying balance of those shares. And then finally, the reserves and reserve funds, and those are what I like to key in on the town's surplus and their financial health. So looking at those in more detail, reserves of $42.5 million was an increase over 2019 of $1.8 million. And again, referring to note 17, there's lots of ins and outs of the reserves and reserve funds through the year. Some were budgeted, some go to council for approval throughout the year. Some are going to be asked for approval at this meeting under Treasurer Lee's report. So within that $1.8 million increase, the main increase was in the water and wastewater reserves. And that is expected and anticipated because water and wastewater department has to be self-sustaining. So included in the water rates are future capital and anticipation. So increase in infrastructure, repair to infrastructure, I should say. So we expect to see an annual surplus there. For the most part, the other reserves are comparable to year over year, with the exception of the acquisition of tangible capital assets reserve. So you'll see a $1.3 million decrease there. But the main reason for this is that some of the money spent on the Main Street Bridge is going to be financed, but the financing came in that construction loan I referred to earlier. So this reserve will be replenished once there is the loans are taken out from Infrastructure Ontario. Those are the highlights of the financial statements as we see them as auditors. I'm happy to field any questions about the audit or the financial statements at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent explanation and all the work that you've done to this point. And I will echo your comments. We have an excellent Treasury team, and I know that you work well with them, so that's great. We are in a strong financial position, and you know, there is some talk in the community. I think most people are comfortable and happy that the town is moving forward with the arena and library, but maybe you could just confirm for them that we are in good financial standing to carry that project out, and that we're in a good position to move forward. If you could just confirm that for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think through the three areas that I spoke to is that there is lots of cash in the bank for the town of Wasaga Beach. There are obligatory reserve funds, mostly in the form of development charges available, and there's debt capacity. So between those three items, there is room for investment in the community, lots of room, and reserves can only be built up for so long. They need to be spent on something, and that comes down to the Council of the Day's a recommendation of what the town needs.
Okay, thank you very much. Jocelyn, did you have anything to add before I open it up to council members?
Perhaps I could just briefly summarize the year-end surplus a little bit, and then also at this time, I would like to thank Jay and his staff from Baker Tilly for their excellent support to the town. During the year, we received advice from Jay, and that helps us a great deal. We have different issues that come up during the year, and it's great to have someone to speak to. And we always do manage to coordinate the audit very well between both parties. So it works extremely well, and thank you, Jay. So the following is just a brief outline. We talked about the 1.8 million on the close to the last slide that Jay presented. And as he mentioned, there are three real activities that build this surplus to the end of the year. So the first one being the budget process. So we have things such as the grant that contributes to the budget, to the reserves through the budget process. We also have some reserves that we're building for future purposes. So those are budgeted in to be transferred to reserves. We also will pull from reserves through our budget process for certain expenditures that we need those reserves to help cover and to help reduce the tax rate impact on the taxpayers. And then during the year would be our second activity. Is there are things that arise during the year that we would not have been able to put into that budget process. And an example of that would be the emergency fire truck that we had to purchase during the year. So we would come to council and request permission to make that expenditure and get that approved during the year as activity with the reserve. And then lastly, at the end of the year, after all the transactions have been processed for the year, we will be in a position of either we will be in a deficit where we need to draw on reserves, or we'll have surpluses and we would contribute those surpluses to reserves. And those are what those the March staff report and today's staff report do, is come to council and request for those final adjustments to reserves to be approved so that we can process them through into the final audited financial statements. So as mentioned, our final year-end surplus is 1.8 million. And that's basically how that gets contributed to the reserves at year end. Lastly, I'd also like to thank the Treasury staff, because it's their hard work and they do a good job in making sure the transactions are processed accurately. And that really contributes to our reporting requirements at year end. And we really have a strong team, and I really would like to thank them all for all the work that they have done. So thank you very much, Mayor Bartolci.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and your team. You do have a great team over there. So I did start to see cards go up. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is such a good news story, and I'd like to thank Baker Tilly for their presentation on our audit for the municipality, and to thank our treasurer, Jocelyn Lee, and the Treasury team for the excellent preparation and working with the auditors to produce this document again this year. I'm going to do my own little version of the Truth Corner today, with apologies to Mr. Jennings, to illustrate just how well this council is doing in protecting our taxpayers and moving the municipality forward, and to dispel some of the fake news being generated by some misinformed residents in the community, where they're saying, you know, we have very little in reserves, we've exhausted our reserves, this sort of thing. And it's we all saw the charts in the Baker Tilly presentation today that compares Wasaga Beach to the provincial averages, and in all cases we favorably exceed the provincial indicators. We're well above it, very, very healthy. Just to highlight little sound bites, that the reserves have increased by almost $2 million from 2019. Our accumulated surplus increased by approximately 10 million from 2019. Our net financial assets increased by approximately 2.5 million. And of course, our net surplus for the year was $1.85 million, which goes into reserves. And this was all done during unprecedented times with the pandemic. So it's very well done. I commend the staff. And later in the agenda, I don't have to talk about it later, but 10.6 is our investment report on our investment portfolio. And during this term of council, we've increased that by $12 million, from 57 to $69 million. Jocelyn will be talking about that later. So all in all, it's a wonderful report, and the town is in very good position. And I thank everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Your Worship. And having done this for a few years, I actually have to tell Jay that this is one of my favorite meetings of the year, is this report. So as Councillor Watson said, this is really a good news story, and you did as well, Your Worship. Some of the takeaways again that were highlighted, although an audit doesn't cover every single transaction, they do look at control systems and procedures, and for both accounting and investing. And it was clearly looked at and said that there are really, in their opinion piece, there's no internal control concerns. There also was an interesting line or sentence that Jay said about how doing the on-site interim report, being in the at town hall and looking through it, was a benefit to the auditor to be able to see and talk and interact directly and get the answers immediately. So I think we stayed open during this entire pandemic, and there's a value. Not only is there a value to the people in Wasaga Beach, but also to things like our audit team. I did have a question though. There was a suggestion about the water budget was higher, and I think Jay said something about you couldn't really predict it. My question, and there's two different parts to this. The first part is, could the water usage be impacted by people who are staying at home as opposed to going somewhere else to work? So they're at home a lot more of the day, as well as seasonal residents who chose to, say, abandon the GTA for a longer period of time. Could that have been a factor that would have been impacted our water? I throw that out to Jay or Jocelyn or Kevin or anybody, just general question.
I see Jay was first to take his mute off, so go ahead, Jay.
Thank you.
Through your worship, yes, we absolutely did see, we saw an increase in consumption. There are water reports that clearly have the overall consumption for the year, and we did see that increase. So, and we saw a similar thing with the hydro companies as well. We saw an increase in consumption, and it makes sense with the town of Wasaga Beach. A lot of residential users that may otherwise be commuting elsewhere, but they were staying home, and yeah, that residential portion is definitely higher.
Okay, so you've almost answered my second question, which is the hydro utilities. You said there was overall lower income, but I know there was more consumption. So I assume that's the fact that the government set the rate for most of 2020 was set very low.
Yes, and again, through you, your worship, actually, the town of the Wasaga Distribution Company doesn't make a lot of its actual return on investment based on the consumption. That is, they pay for the hydro, it comes to them, it flows through them, and they bill it out. So even though on their financial statements, you will see a large increase in what the ratepayers paid in hydro, it's not a profit to them at the end of the day on their bottom line.
Okay, the last part, and I promise this is the last, at least at this point, is again, Jay mentioned that we're building up reserves, and at times they have to be spent. I guess the two-part question: we don't win an award for having the most amount of reserves of any municipality, I assume. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, good. And the second part is oftentimes when we're taking money out of reserves, so you're deleting, you're taking out of one account the reserves, but you're building up capital assets, which show on the other side of the balance sheet. Is that correct?
That is correct. So
Okay.
as I mentioned, that accumulated surplus is made up of reserves and tangible capital assets. So you're just taking it from those cash and liquid assets and investing in your own infrastructure.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And I'll just end by quoting you several times. Strong cash position, very strong position for net financial assets. This is nothing but a good news story. So, and by the way, you talked briefly about building and development charges and all that. And we have to bear in mind that year to date, 2021 is setting a record by far. So this should be I'll be even more excited next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments on the report? Okay, well, thank you, Jay and Jocelyn. Much appreciated. And I do have a motion here, if I can get a mover and seconder. Councillor Foster and Councillor Kinney. The council received the Treasurer's 2020 financial report for information, and further that council approved the additional year-end transfers to from reserves as presented in Table 2 of the staff report, and that council approved the 2020 audited financial statements as presented by Baker Tilly SGB LLP. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to comment and question period. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone registered for today?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Next is closed session. If I could have a mover and seconder, please. The Deputy Mayor Bray and Councillor Foster resolve that pursuant to section 239(2)(a), D, and F of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, the next portion of the June 29th, 2021 regular council meeting will move into closed session to discuss the security of the property of the municipality or local board, labor relations or employee negotiations, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So we'll just give a minute to going to let me know when you're ready, Dina?
We're ready.
Oh, hang on. I think I've got back feed in my office.
The term is feedback, not backfeed.
I don't know how to make it stop.
We are live.
Sorry about that. If we can just hang on 1 second, because it's playing back in my office here. Okay, I think I'm good now. Sorry about that, everybody. So we are now back in open session. If I can have a mover and seconder for item 7.1. Councillor Watson and Councillor Kinney. The council confirms the direction provided to the manager, human resources in closed session pertaining to labor relations and negotiations. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 7.2. The council confirms the direction provided to the CAO in closed session pertaining to a lease matter. If I can have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Foster, Councillor Kinney, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 7.3, if I can have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kinney, Councillor Foster. The council received the legal counsel letter provided in closed session pertaining to a planning matter for information. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 7.4, a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kinney and Deputy Mayor Bray. The council confirms the direction provided to the CAO in closed session pertaining to a property matter. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 7.5, a mover and seconder. Councillor Kinney and Deputy Mayor Bray. The council confirms the direction provided to the CAO in closed session pertaining to a beachfront property matter. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Closed session minutes, a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kinney and Councillor Wells. Resolved that council receive the following closed session reports as circulated and approves all actions contained therein. Coordinated Committee, June 10th, 2021, closed session minutes. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Unfinished business, we have none. Correspondence received for information requiring action or referred, we have none. Moving on to committee, board, and staff reports, we will start with Community Services. Councillor Kinney, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The following are the highlights from the June 10th, 2021 Community Service section of Coordinated Committee. Robert Lockhart of the Rethink Group presented highlights of the Senior Active Living Strategy. The strategy is a long-term, big picture look ahead to 2035. The public can review the strategy on the town's website. The committee received the presentation for information and asked staff to develop related work plans. Mark Hill of Digital Giants presented to committee the Senior Active Living Center online program strategy. The strategy recommends steps the town should take to ensure the delivery of sustainable online recreational programs for people age 55 and older. Committee received the presentation for information. It is on the town website for review. Committee directed staff to develop related work plans to guide future program delivery. Committee is recommending Council of Ward in principle the contract for architectural services for the renovation of Fire Station 2 to Lloyd Hunt Architect at a cost of $56,000 plus HST, subject to contract approval. The town identified Mr. Hunt through a RFP process as per town's purchasing policy. Committee is recommending that council approve hosting the community agencies Sorry, Your Worship, I'm struck on that one. I'll start again. Community is recommending that council approve hosting the community agency Bacardi Dance Bar Sample event on various weekends in July and August from noon to 7 p.m. on designated days on Main Street pedestrian space at the beachfront. In addition, the committee is recommending that a rental fee of $450 plus other for-profit applicable fees be paid by the community agency for use of the space each weekend. As well, the committee received for information the report on the Twin Pad Arena and Library fundraising targets. Staff are recommending that the targets be amended to 1.7 million from the original 150,000 net. Based on the funding raising program being proposed, committee is recommending that council direct staff to deposit all in-year funds raised on behalf of the project into the recreation and library obligatory reserve accounts. On behalf of the community services section of coordinated committee, I ask that council approve the recommendations in this report. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Councillor Kinney's report? Okay, moving on to Public Works, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. The following are the highlights from the June the 10th, 2021 Public Works section of Coordinated Committee. Committee received the Capital Works Project Status Report for information. The report notes a number of projects are underway. This includes the River Road West Water Tower interior painting and repairs project, the Veterans Way Klondike Park Road geometric improvements and water main project, and the Bay Sands external area drainage construction project. The Main Street Bridge reconstruction project is winding down and the bridge opened to two-way traffic earlier this month. Committee authorized staff to prepare and release an RFP for the design build of a prefabricated metal building at the sports park property. The town's parks division will use the building for storage. It will replace a pole barn the town used on municipal property immediately west of the sports park. The pole barn partially collapsed due to a heavy snow load last winter. The town's insurance adjusters provided a replacement value of $460,000 and recommend the town proceed accordingly. Committee received the Water Pollution Control Plant monthly performance report and the drinking water system report for information. The reports note the two systems are operating according to provincial standards. And I will note that we have the capacity in both our water and sewage systems to accommodate our projected growth for the municipality going forward with no issues at all. The committee also received transit ridership reports for Wasaga Beach Transit. 3,778 rides occurred in May. To date, the system has supported almost 20,000 rides this year. The full report is available on the town website. On behalf of Public Works section of Coordinated Committee, I ask that council approve the recommendations in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Councillor Watson? Okay, moving on to Councillor Foster, Development Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. The following are the highlights of the June 10th, 2021 Development Services section of Coordinated Committee. Aaron Lowry and Daniela Klipper of the Lake Huron Central for Coastal Conservation presented information about the Green Ribbon Champion Program, which provides advice, resources, and support to residents living along the Lake Huron coast within the beach dune ecosystem. The committee received the presentation for information. The committee supports the organization working with other agencies to create a more fulsome plan and then report to committee again. Committee received the draft wayfinding strategy from Entro Communications for information and referred the strategy to staff for a review and recommendation. The wayfinding strategy maps out a plan for creation of information signage. Ultimately, the signage will be throughout the community to assist people in getting around town. A related report received for information outlines funding opportunities to support the implementation of the wayfinding strategy. Committee is recommending Council approve the application for draft plan of subdivision, PS 0220, and the related zoning bylaw amendment. Committee held a public meeting regarding the applications in September 2020, and staff considered the comments made. The property is at 81 Berkeley Street, just west of Anstey Road in the West End. The land is on the east side of Berkeley Street, south of Northgate Road. The applicant plans to build 12 new single detached homes on the property. Committee received the building department summary for May. The department issued 51 building permits with a total estimated construction value of $6.5 million. In queue for building permits are applications for approximately 156 townhomes and 37 detached homes. Committee is recommending that Council approve a facade improvement grant application for Donald Langman of Wasaga Adventure Park in the amount of $1,500. On behalf of the Development Services section of the Coordinating Committee, I ask that Council approve the recommendations in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Councillor Foster? Moving on to General Government, Deputy Mayor Bray, please.
Thank you, Mayor Byfolchi. The following are the highlights from the June 10th, 2021 General Government section of Coordinated Committee. Committee recommends that Council declare the vacant town-owned lot on Island View Crescent surplus and that a fair market value of the land be determined. In addition, Committee recommends to Council that it use the direct sale method for the property, selling it to the abutting property owner. In addition, Committee recommends that Council award the contract for the purchase of a new 2021 cargo van at a cost of $42,439 to Hannah Motor Sales. Town staff used an RFP process to identify the purchase. Committee is also recommending that Council award the contract for the purchase of a new single-axle truck and a tandem axle truck, complete with plow and sander equipment, to Lewis Motor Sales, Inc. at a cost of $655,477. Staff used an RFP process to identify the purchase. Committee is recommending that Council approve the amendment to the agreement with Rogers Communications Incorporated, the telecommunications site at 950 River Road West, and that staff bring to Council a bylaw for consideration for this agreement. A bylaw is before Council for consideration later today. Committee also received the Municipal Law Enforcement Property Standards Report for May, outlining another busy month that included 381 calls for service. During the month, the department issued 430 parking infraction tickets. Committee also received an update from town staff on COVID-19 related information. Communications Officer, the Deputy Fire Chief, and the Chief Administrative Officer provided reports. Committee then moved into closed session to deal with human resources matters, legal matters, and labor relations matters. Later in open session, Committee confirmed its closed session direction to Council. One of the items being recommended to Council is the closure of municipal facilities on July the 2nd and providing staff with a paid vacation day in recognition of their dedication and resiliency over the past 15 months, dealing with all the changes related to COVID-19 and continuing to deliver excellent public services to the community. Committee was of the view that the vacation day is well deserved. On behalf of the General Government section of Coordinated Committee, I ask that Council approve the recommendations in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Deputy Mayor Bray's report? Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Mayor Byfolchi. Yes, I'd like to comment on the recommendation of a paid staff holiday in recognition for the COVID efforts to all members of our staff. I feel it's important that I let our town team and the public know why I voted in opposition to this recommendation to give every staff member a day off with pay on July 2nd in recognition of their extra effort through COVID. I fully agree that our town team did an excellent job through COVID and are deserving of recognition. In fact, in closed session, I had suggested some more cost-effective reward options that I could support. However, I could not support the significant cost associated with 160 paid days off for the following reasons. Given the loss of jobs and considerable negative financial impact experienced by many of our residents and local business through COVID, I feel that the municipality could better use funds to further support those most seriously impacted. Many small businesses had to close or implement costly COVID processes and still often resulted in operating at a loss. I'm also concerned that many in our community will not agree with this expenditure of taxpayers' money, and that I did not want it to, the decision to reflect poorly on council. I believe that to the greatest extent, our town team enjoyed excellent job security throughout the pandemic, and that they are fairly compensated versus like jobs in the private sector. Not all job functions were impacted to the same extent due to COVID. And previously, council had approved spending $15,000 to reward unnamed staff members for their extra effort during COVID. And now these same individuals will now be rewarded a second time for the same thing. We have had considerable staff turnover, and many of our staff receiving this paid holiday or paid day off have only been employed by the town for under 6 months. Again, I want to recognize our town team for their excellent effort and performance during COVID, and reinforce that I was supportive of formal recognition and reward. In good conscience, for the reasons stated, I could not support the considerable cost to the taxpayer associated with a full paid day off with benefits for all 160 employees. And one last question for our CAO. Are you aware of any other municipality in Ontario that has rewarded their entire staff with a paid day off with benefits for their extra efforts through the challenges of working through the COVID pandemic? Thank you.
I will get the CAO to answer that after I've said what I have to say. I am extremely proud of our staff. When the going got tough, our staff stepped up. They served our community. They responded to inquiries. They processed applications. They looked after our community, and they kept our organization running. When our staff were here at their desk, in their truck, shovel in hand, working in our community to keep things going, their counterparts in other municipalities were at home, working, maybe at the cottage, maybe on the dock. They were not performing the way our staff were performing. I have had mayors say to me, I wish I could get my town hall open. I've heard residents in other communities say, I wish I could get a response or answer from my town hall. Landowners in other communities wanting to improve or develop their properties, concerned because they can't get a hold of anyone to process their applications. Those applications, by the way, bring development charges and other things into the town. Our community did not skip a beat during COVID, and that is because of our staff. I value our staff, and I find it hard to believe that we are squawking about one day for them to have off when we would be so far behind right now had they not come to work over the past year. So I am fully supportive of this because the value added is greater than I can explain. So Mr. CEO, I'll go to you now.
Thank you, Worship. Members of Council, just a couple of points. First, to answer Councillor Belanger's questions. I don't know across the province of Ontario. I had not asked. I did ask in the county of Simcoe, and councils were in the process of dealing with it either at the staff level or through their municipal councils. And the information I am aware of is the Township of Essa is following what the town of Wasaga Beach is doing. And the town of Bradford West Willenbury has taken a slightly different approach. And they've just provided each of their employees with 3 days of paid vacation in lieu of the challenges that they faced as a result of COVID. So those are just two that I'm aware of in Simcoe County, and there may be more information coming out. The second point I wanted to make is with respect to the cost, and there is a cost. The treasurer has estimated that or deputy treasurer has estimated that the cost is about $38,000 to the corporation. Certainly in the analysis that was done, that cost can be more than covered through the salary gapping dollars that exist across the corporation with respect to the various departments' wages and benefits. The last point I'd like to make is that when we started this, Your Worship, members of council, back in March of 2020, we took the stand that we're all in this together, and it didn't matter which department you worked in, your classification, whatnot. We were a team. We were going to stand shoulder to shoulder with everybody. There was no distinction between inside workers, outside workers, firefighters, casuals, part-timers. So whether you were part of the team in any one of those roles, you were asked to continue to serve the residents of Wasaga Beach. And yes, we have lost employees and new employees have joined us, but they're still part of the team. And when this proposal was brought forward, it was brought forward in the context of that team. We are only as strong as our weakest link, and everybody pitched in and everybody did what they could do to continue moving the business forward. So there wasn't a distinction made between casual, part-time, whether you started 2 days ago or 2 years ago. You were part of the team. The recommendation was that all the team be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments, Mr. CAO. I manage my own private company, and I know going back to last March, they were incredibly uncertain times, and kind of the fear and the concern of those that did, in my case, choose to work, and those that didn't. It was a personal decision for a lot of people how they handled what they did through COVID. But for us as members of council, I think when senior management come to us and ask us to make a decision, we really do need to rely on their recommendation, because your boots are on the ground every day. I look in, I visit once a week. During COVID, I visited once a month maybe, but I don't really know what's happening inside every single day at town hall. But I know that the people that I do meet on the street, the people that come to my store, they're happy, they're proud to be working for the town. And I think if it's one little thing we can do to maybe help our senior staff manage staff turnover, then it's an investment in the future. This should not be considered an expense. So I'm fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for raising that. And you're right. Everybody did handle it differently. And just because our staff showed up to work did not mean that they were not fearful, like many other people who were at home. But they felt a responsibility to the town, and they showed up, and that means a lot in an organization. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to add my 2 cents, and I'm extremely proud of the staff that work at the town. You were there when we needed you, and you're still there. Our CAO mentioned a team. A team wins together, or a team loses together. And really, I look at everything that the ability for our town to be open brought in from a day-and-day point of view. I think it's an extremely minimum gesture on council part, giving them the day. And I think it's great, and I support the movement going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our employees are the backbone of this organization. They're valuable assets to this town, and I think we did the right thing to give them that day to enjoy. And I agree with you, Your Worship, that I think the dollars that came into the town by being open and processing the permits and realizing the development charges coming forward from all that far outweighs this minimal cost. And I'm very proud of our team, and it really is a team. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster, did I see your card up? And I
Yeah.
just will note, I know that you have to leave at 11:15, so I would ask council after we do the item 10.1, maybe we can go to community announcements, because I know Councillor Foster would like that opportunity.
I appreciate that, Your Worship. And I just, again, Councillor Watson just hit on his final note. If we look at building department alone, the permit revenue that we've created this year is bigger year to date than the previous 2 years combined. So, you know, I think that to sit there and go with our staff who stayed open, came in at personal risk to themselves during uncertain times, to sit there and say, we're going to, you know, choose not to give this little token. And I understand it's money, I get that. But you go, I think it's petty and vindictive to sit there and say, you know, this is recognizing teamwork, and I approve of it 100%.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder for item 10.1, please? Councillor Kinney and Deputy Mayor Bray. The council received the coordinated committee reports of June 10th, 2021 as circulated and approves all actions contained therein. All those in favor? And those opposed? So that is carried by a vote of 6-1 with Councillor Belanger in opposition. We will now, if everybody's okay, I'm moving to community announcements. We'll just mix up the agenda a little bit. We will go to Councillor Foster first.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the tolerance from council again on a slightly change in our schedule. Both my wife and I do have doctor's appointments that came up, and I can't avoid them. So, but I did have, under councillor's comments, I wanted to say we all receive calls from residents, businesses, and guests on many topics every week. This week, I received a number of inquiries about Canada Day and our festivities throughout the town. Well, we will not be holding any of our traditional events. I wanted to be clear, this is mainly due to COVID protocols and an abundance of caution. That being said, I think that we as a council, corporation, and community need to acknowledge the residential school issues that continue to come to light. I believe it's far from over at this point. It cannot be dismissed as just a sad part of our history, and every member of this council was alive when the last residential school closed. This is not ancient history, it's also current history. We cannot deny it or erase it, but perhaps we can learn from it. While we may not have had a residential school in our community, we cannot have blinders to the outcome when generations have suffered. I'd like to put out the suggestion that council reaches out to an Indigenous educator to provide a seminar to council and staff on the history of our area and the challenges faced by our local Indigenous community. Perhaps this can be the first step to a more tolerant and collaborative relationship going forward. As Canadians, we have so much to be proud of, but we cannot afford to ignore areas where we have failed our population and all of our population. We continue to have issues that need to be recognized, understood, and addressed. And only by learning and tolerance do we have the opportunity to chart a better and stronger future. I will leave it to council and staff to consider my suggestion as appropriate. And that's my comments for the last little bit. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will do community announcements now, places we've been, things we've seen and done. I'll open it up. We'll start with Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Mayor Byfolchi. Yes, we attended a grand opening for a new business in the Stonebridge Town Center. We also attended the Lions Club sign dedication for the skateboard park. Certainly, there's been many residents follow-ups through COVID on questions and property standard issues and those types of things. We completed the Canada Day video, and that's out on the town's website and on social media now. Attended a development information Zoom session, which was not part of the formal planning process, but Beechwood Developments was providing information to those interested parties. So I wanted to understand what was going on. There were certainly contacted by a number of residents about that. And most importantly, and I'm very excited about my haircut is scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on July 3rd. So hopefully by the next meeting, I'll be cleaned up a little. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Spent a lot of time in the community trying to help businesses out as far as local openings and stuff like that. Quick comment to Councillor Belanger's comment about haircut. I don't need that right this moment, but I'm glad that it's available. Before I close, Your Worship, I'd like to wish all members, staff, council, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, all of our residents in the town of Wasaga Beach and the whole country a very happy Canada Day. And please be safe. And I wish you have the ability to spend that Canada Day as you see fit as a Canadian. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bray.
Thank you, Your Worship. I saw an increase in activities this month, so hopefully that's a sign that the world is getting vaccinated, or at least our part of the world, and that we're able to start to see some return to a normal. It was Seniors Month, and I know we get a few gathered to raise the flag. And I also wanted to acknowledge that this was the first time that the Age Friendly Committee has had a meeting via Zoom in probably 13 or 14 months. So it was exciting. It took a lot to get the technology working. I think there's still a few glitches to get through, but it's exciting to see that our advisory committees can start to meet again. I attended the Air Cadets annual inspection. Participated in a county-wide fire service review. Of course, this was our second annual virtual Father's Day, which I think was a challenge for many. Spoke to many residents and helped them navigate town hall, which I truly believe is our function as elected officials, is to help those who have questions figure out what they need to do to get those issues resolved. And had my second COVID shot. So probably lots of personal things on this one. Attended the Simcoe County Conference. Was at Dr. Norman Q's 25th business anniversary, which I just think is great to see that there are businesses that have been around this long in our town, because we're relatively young as a town, but we're certainly heading in the right direction, which is very exciting. So thank you very much, and happy Canada Day to all.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Your Worship. Excuse me. Again, a few concerns from residents to be addressed and to assist them in, as Deputy Mayor Bray says, navigating town hall and knowing who to talk to. I was very pleased on behalf of council and our residents to represent the town at the 100th birthday celebration for Keith Brett. Keith has been a long-time resident of Wasaga Beach, and as are all his family. And so it was pretty exciting to have the opportunity to talk to Keith. It was personal for me in that Keith's originally and his family are originally from the town of Weston, which was my home, and our parents were well acquainted. And so there's a long history between the Brett family and ourselves. So to see Keith well and sharp as a tack on his 100th birthday was quite exciting. I did attend the Lions Club recognition of their donation to the skate park. I believe it was $30,000 they committed to the skate park for equipment and so forth. And I was pleased to attend the 25th anniversary of Dr. Q's chiropody, I guess is the way to say it, clinic on River Road West. 25 years of service to the community is nothing to be minimized. And so congratulations to Dr. Q and his wife Daisy on great service to our town. I guess I just want to take an opportunity to wish everybody a Canada Day, happy Canada Day. I know there have been some serious issues arise over the past few months, and they cannot be swept under the rug. They cannot be minimized in any way. There's tragedy and that has existed in our path. But at the same time, I think we have to celebrate that Canada has come a long way over the years. We still have to recognize our contribution through many of our fallen soldiers to the war efforts of the First and Second World War, plus the Korean and wars that followed. We have to recognize the contribution of so many of our residents to just creating a good life for other people through their service to the community. So while we have to accept and take some responsibility for the things that happened in our past, I think we need to also celebrate how far we have come. Not to say we don't have a long way to go, but we have come a long way as a country. And I look forward to many more years of progress in Canada. So happy Canada Day.
Thank you, Councillor Wells, and Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to give a little shout out to the sign wars that have been going on in our community. It's been wonderful to see the engagement of the community, and it shows a great community spirit, and the signs have been very clever in their messaging and quite humorous. So it was nice to see. Attended two Wasaga Valley Conservation meetings over the last period of time. There's been a lot of work in that area. The provincial government is doing consultations to try and streamline conservation activities and keep them in their own lane going forward. So that's been an active committee. The Business Recovery Task Force, we've had 2 meetings, and we continue to build on programs to assist businesses in the community. I was at the opening of the grand opening of the Sessions Cannabis in the Stonebridge Plaza. That's a beautiful new store. It's a tremendous building. If you ever have a chance to go in and see it, they've done a wonderful job with it. The farmers market is actually, it's this afternoon again. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m. it starts. But they have a very nice setup up at the Recplex. They're on the west side of the parking lot near the gazebo. There's lots of shade. The vendors are very interesting, and I give credit to Marlene Parkins and her staff for setting that up. And the bookmobile is there every week also, so that's a nice addition to the farmers market. I attended virtually the Chamber of Commerce AGM. Colleen Bannerman just came to her end as 3 years as president of the chamber. She did a wonderful job with that with the chamber, and Leslie Listro has become the new chamber president for the coming year. So I wish the chamber well in 2021. I attended the unveiling of the Lions Club sign at the skateboard park, the 100th anniversary of Lions. Also the Wasaga Foot Clinic with Dr. Q for 25 years in business. Also attended virtually the annual Rotary Club of Wasaga Beach changeover. Daryl Quirk, the outgoing president, and Mark Weingarten is the new president. Very well attended, and Rotary is up and going and doing all the good work and donating monies to the community. And I did notice that the Moby mats or mobility mats went out in the different park areas. And I give a shout out to former councillor Morley Berkowitz, who was kind of instrumental a few years ago in getting those Moby mats out. So it's very nice to see that happening, and enjoy Canada Day. Thank you.
And thank you. And for myself, just the regular meetings, I've had county council, several arena and library, new build meetings, the economic development task force. I met with the Society for the Arts, chamber meeting, affordable housing, as well as a number of the events and celebrations that other council members have already mentioned. And with that, I too will say happy Canada Day. I hope everyone enjoys their day. With that, we will go back in the agenda to item 10.2, and that is Committee of the Whole minutes from June 17th. The following are the highlights from the June 17th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting. Committee received a presentation on the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan created in response to stipulations in the Safe Ontario Act 2018 and created with involvement from stakeholder agencies. The plan focuses on the following priorities: mental health and addictions, housing and access to services. Committee recommended Council adopt the plan. Committee is recommending Council not allow an ice cream truck to operate from 10 Main Street. The ice cream truck operation does not have a brick and mortar store in town and therefore does not meet criteria to operate at the beachfront area site. Committee is recommending Council approve Dance by Design's use of the town's SL 100 stage for a drive-in event on July 15th. The staff report outlines reported details. Committee is recommending Council approve the Business Recovery Task Force initiative of establishing live music at various business patios this summer. In addition, Committee is recommending Council approve up to $12,000 for costs associated with artist fees. Staff believe the patio music program will be beneficial to businesses affected by the pandemic. Committee is recommending Council approve the Business Recovery Task Force's Open Parks program. The program would allow recreation-based businesses and personal trainers to use municipal parks for operation when permitted under provincial guidelines until September 30th on a case-by-case basis. The committee is recommending that Council receive for information the CAO's report on the team established to negotiate with Slate Asset Management the purchase, sale, and development agreements for the town-owned land at the beachfront. Committee is recommending that Council receive the Treasurer's financial report for January to April. The report notes that the town is in a healthy financial position. Committee received the draft signed bylaw and following discussion referred the draft to staff to incorporate comments made by committee members. On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I ask that Council approve the recommendations in this report. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, if I can have a mover and seconder for this motion, please. Councillor Kinney and Councillor Watson, the Council received the Committee of the Whole report of June 17th, 2021 as circulated and approves all actions contained therein. All those in favor? And that is carried 6-0, noting that Councillor Foster has now left the meeting. Next, we have accounts. Deputy Mayor Bray, did you wish to speak to these? Yes.
Sorry, I have a floating mouse today, so sometimes it floats off of my screen. Thank you, Your Worship. The accounts have been viewed and supported, and confirmed by the respective standing committees of council. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And if I can have a mover and seconder. Councillor Kinney and Councillor Wells, that Council approve the May 1st to 31st, 2021 accounts in the amount of $3,504,725.77. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 10.4, proclamations and flag raisings. If I could have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Belanger and Deputy Mayor Bray, that Council receive the information report pertaining to proclamations and flag raisings for the month of June 2021 for information. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 10.5, the CAO's report with regard to gypsy moth infestation. If I can have a mover and seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Bray and Councillor Watson, that Council indicated support for a notice of motion introduced at County Council pertaining to a request for a staff report on options to deal with the gypsy moth infestation to be brought forward to the August County Council meeting for consideration, and that County Council be asked to share the results of the review with member municipalities so that they may make informed decisions on any actions they may wish to take in 2022 to address the infestation. Is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Mayor Byfolchi. I'd like to speak a little bit to the report. The county report indicated that the gypsy moth caterpillars feed on white oak, red oak, poplar, and white birch. In a conversation with our CAO and also with a number of residents, it would appear that they also devastate white pine and blue spruce. And in those particular cases, the damage has been significant. The report speaks to tree mortality after repeated years of 50 to 60% defoliage or defoliation, but we're going to be going into our third year. it's been indicated by an arborist to me that 3 consecutive years can end up destroying an oak tree that it cannot recover. So in addition to the case of the pines and the blue spruces, it's my understanding that those needles don't rejuvenate or regenerate. So we will have some significant loss in this current year of some of our canopy. In fact, I had shown some images to the clerk, and I had forwarded them to some members of council just to reinforce the devastation to our tree canopy. And I can only imagine what's taken place within the provincial park. So a number of residents were planning to and may still make a deputation to council just to reinforce the requirement for mitigation action in 2022. So yeah, it's very concerning. And it in all above the damage to the trees, I can tell you that the quality of life for many residents have been greatly impacted by this infestation. And it's very hit and miss. Like there's parts of towns that haven't been impacted at all. And then there's other areas that it's their homes have just been absolutely covered in the thing. So anyhow, I'm looking forward to the recommendations and mitigation action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And absolutely, I think we've all had our fill of caterpillars and the mess they leave and everything else. You know, the CAO and I have had discussions with regard to next year and how we will deal with it. You know, some people are saying just spray the whole town. I don't know that it's as easy as just spraying the whole town or what that cost is or anything else, but the County of Simcoe does have a forestry department. So I think that's why if at the county, they can review that and look at it and share that with municipalities, then we can kind of see what works for our municipality. Is there anything else on this before I call the question? I think I've read the motion. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Next is the Director of Finance and Treasurer's report, the 2020 Annual Investment Report for information. If I can have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Belanger and Deputy Mayor Bray, the council received the 2020 Investment Report for information. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 10.7 regarding the Twin Pad Arena and Library Project tender approval. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Bray and Councillor Kinney. The council approved the new Twin Pad Arena and Library Project's updated scope of 117,669 square feet with a scheduled projected completion of April 2023 as developed through the design development and construction document development phases in consultation with the town's construction steering group, CSG, and further that council authorized staff to circulate the tender document for a stipulated sum contract bid to the 5 pre-qualified general contractors in early July with a closing date of August 11th, 2021 at an estimated construction cost of $44,573,921 within an overall project cost of $59,970,306. Is there any discussion? Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just think there's been a lot of people in town happy to see this move forward. And with it being where we're keeping in budget, I think it's a good story when you factor in all the other things that town council's doing. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And I was corrected. I apparently said 59,000 instead of 59 million. 59,000 would be lovely. Deputy Mayor Bray.
It was just 3 zeros, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much. It's so exciting as a member of council to see this come forward. We've been talking about it since the previous term of council and probably the the term before that. To think that shovels will be in the ground this fall is incredibly exciting and a great future, or predicting a great future for our town. So thank you very much. As a member of the construction steering group, I can assure everyone that we have worked very hard with staff, with the consultants to get to where we are today. And hearing our treasurer's report today and the auditor's report today, I really don't believe that there's any time like the present. So thank you very much for everyone who has got us this far.
Thank you. And we are in a great financial position to continue moving forward, and we will continue looking for those grants. I've already put a bug in it at the province, so we will continue with that. If there's no other comments, then I will call it. All those in favor? And those opposed? And that is carried by a vote of 5-1 with Councillor Belanger in opposition. Item 10.8, the CAO's report with regard to Rivers Edge subdivision. If I can have a mover and seconder. Oh, I'll read the motion first because we did add a line from our discussions in camera. So the motion will read, whereas draft plan approval conditions 78, 79, 80, and 81 attributed to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks pertaining to the Sunnydale Estates Limited, Brook Valley Wasaga Limited subdivision were included in the subdivision conditions of draft approval dated April 30th, 2020 through a misinterpretation of the requirements of the Endangered Species Act 2007. Be it resolved, the council delete draft plan approval conditions 78, 79, 80, and 81 pertaining to the Sunnydale Estates Limited, Brook Valley Wasaga Limited subdivision dated April 30th, 2020, and substitute a new condition as provided by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks, and that the new condition 78 from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks be inserted as follows, and the remaining conditions renumbered accordingly. Nothing in this draft approval dated April 30th, 2020 removes the Sunnydale Estates Limited, Brook Valley Wasaga Limited obligation to comply with all other applicable law, including the Endangered Species Act 2007, and that council deem this amendment to the draft plan approval conditions dated April 30th, 2020 to be minor, and that staff be authorized to approve the site alteration agreement with Brook Valley Wasaga Limited subject to all municipal requirements being met and the owner meeting the requirements of the Endangered Species Act, and that staff be authorized to approve the pre-servicing agreement with Brook Valley Wasaga Limited subject to Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority approval and all municipal requirements being met. If I could have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kinney and Deputy Mayor Bray. Any discussion? Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Mayor Byfolchi. Yes, I want to point out, it's my understanding that these draft plan conditions that we are considering an interpretation or a misinterpretation have been consistently applied to developments in our town for a significant period of time. This is the first time we're recommending a change or an amendment. In reading the report, I certainly got the sense that the developer is wanting this change so they're able to move forward more quickly. I certainly understand that they still have the responsibility to meet all of the requirements of the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks. However, I still have concern as to reading the full report and the developer feeling that some prior studies met all the requirements that we could potentially move forward. I just find that putting the onus on the developer and on their consultant is not necessarily the most expedient way to ensure that wildlife habitat is protected. And I think if any work were to commence and any significant wildlife habitat or endangered species habitat was destroyed, it would be very difficult to go in after the fact. I would be much more comfortable, and my understanding is they are working with the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks. And I don't see the difficulty in finding or being communicated their finding. And then at that point, allowing the developer to move forward. I just have some concerns and I won't be supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just, for the public, reiterate the pieces that were in the motion is that this is in consultation with Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, with the town's planning department and the town solicitor. Did anybody else have any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, I've already read the motion. All those in favor? And those opposed? And that is carried by a vote of 5-1 with Councillor Belanger in opposition. Next is the CAO's verbal update on COVID. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. Again, I'm joined by our Deputy Fire Chief, who has taken the lead on behalf of the municipality with respect to COVID matters, and our Communications Officer, Mike Jennings, who monitors developments at the provincial level. Both of them have reports to deliver to council, and then I'll follow up with an update from the command team. Thank you.
Mr. Jennings. We can't hear you. Are your speakers plugged in again?
Thank you. Bad habit. Good morning. I'll keep my report brief. I just wanted to highlight one item for council this morning, and that is that on the 24th of June, the province announced that we were moving to step 2 of the roadmap to reopen. So that's some exciting news for our residents as well as our business community. Details of what step 2 means can be found on our COVID-19 information page. And all of the new permitted activities will be posted there at midnight tomorrow morning. So that page will be updated accordingly. And that concludes my remarks to you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chief.
Good morning, members of council. Globally, there have been more than 181 million cases of COVID-19 with 3.93 million deaths. Nationally, we've experienced 1.14 million cases with 26,230 deaths, and provincially, we've now surpassed 544,000 cases, and that includes 533,000 recoveries and 9,129 deaths. There are currently 224 COVID positive patients admitted to ICUs across the province, and that number includes 158 that are on ventilators. The provincial testing positivity rate has dropped to 1.8%, and to date, Ontario has conducted just over 15.8 million COVID-19 tests. Provincially, 76% of residents over the age of 12 years old have had a single dose of vaccine, while 34% are now fully immunized. And in the Simcoe-Muskoka region, we have had a total of 12,264 cases with 11,496 recoveries and 249 deaths. There were 39 cases reported to the health unit last week, which is 39% lower than the 64 cases reported the previous week. And this is the lowest weekly count since September of 2020. There are now 12 individuals hospitalized in Simcoe-Muskoka, and the 7-day moving average of COVID-19 cases in our region has dropped to 6.2 cases per day. Our testing positivity rate locally is 1.1%, and there are 3 active outbreaks in the region, including 2 congregate living settings and 1 workplace. Within Simcoe-Muskoka, 73.5% of people over 12 years old have received 1 dose of vaccine, and 28.3% are fully immunized. And finally, locally in Wasaga Beach, we've had a total now of 260 cases. 0 of the individuals are now in hospital. We have 13 remaining isolating within the community, and we've had 242 recoveries. Our number of COVID-19 related deaths in our community remains at 5, and the most recent new case was listed on June the 22nd. There are no active outbreaks in Wasaga Beach, And finally, Wasaga Beach residents with 1 dose of vaccine is 69.8% of our population, with 27.1% who are now fully immunized. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mike or Craig? Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to note that the Premier mentioned yesterday that that they're going to look at maybe redrawing the lines for Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit to maybe segregate out the fact that as you go further north from Barrie, that we're a different animal. And I thought that was good news. So going forward, that we may not be lumped in with a more urban center with more cases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. I'll be brief as well. As you heard, step 2 of the province's 3-stage roadmap to safely reopen the province commences tomorrow, 2 days earlier than originally planned. The earliest step 3 can now start is July 21st, unless the province decides to implement it sooner. There are a few impacts on town operations moving to step 2. Organized outdoor activities are permitted with no restrictions on numbers, provided participants can maintain 2-meter distancing. Organized games of soccer, baseball are examples of 2 activities that can start. Spectators are now permitted. Libraries can now open with a limit of 25% of rated capacity. Organized outdoor town events are now limited to 25% of rated capacity. The events department is reviewing the delivery of some of its outdoor events, such as Jazz in the Park, to deliver them in keeping with the expanded capacity limits. Most indoor activities are not permitted or have a limit of 5 people. The province has exceeded the indicators for implementation of step 3, 70 to 80% of 1 dose of vaccine and 25% of the population fully vaccinated. As a result, it may move faster to implement this stage. This has implications for the town operations, as all facilities would then be open to the public. Indoor organized gatherings and sports and recreation activities would be permitted, with capacity numbers to be determined. Indoor events would also be permitted. In early July, we will commence transitioning staff back to facilities and events in anticipation of step 3 of the reopening plan happening sooner. In closing, Your Worship and members of council, on behalf of all staff, I would like to thank council formally for July 2nd as a paid day off. I have heard from several staff, and I know members of council have also received messages from staff who are very appreciative of council's decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kinney?
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick question to our CAO. When phase 3 opens up, are we as a town going to be a role model for keeping our COVID protocols in place as far as masks and or protective screening for our staff? Because my overall thought is those small consolations not only protect you against COVID, but any other possible airborne disease. And I'm just asking that question. Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship, to the councillor. Certainly it's town's intent to continue to follow the protocols as outlined by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. We rely on the Medical Officer of Health for our protocols, and our Deputy Fire Chief works closely with the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit to make sure that our protocols are updated as required.
Okay, if there's nothing further, I'll look for a mover and seconder for this motion. Councillor Kinney, Councillor Watson. The council received the June 29th, 2021 verbal COVID-19 update from the CAO for information. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Notices of motion, I'm not aware of any. Notices where notice has been previously given, there are none. Calling of committee meetings, Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. So as we head into the month of July, our coordinated committee is scheduled for Thursday, July 15th at 9 a.m. And that will be held virtually. We do not have a committee of the whole meeting scheduled for July, but as I alluded to members of council, I'll be looking to schedule 2 education sessions based on council's schedule and our advisor schedule in the month of July. So stay tuned for those dates. And our official council meeting for the month of July is Tuesday, July 27th at 9 a.m. And again, that will be held virtually. Thank you, Worship.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to bylaws, if I can have a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Bray, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Resolved that the following bylaws be received and be deemed to have been read a first, second, and third time, passed and numbered as follows. 2021-54, a bylaw to appoint a building inspector, plans examiner for the town of Wasaga Beach, Adam Horton. 2021-55, a bylaw to appoint building inspector, plans examiner for the town of Wasaga Beach, Natasha Stefanovska. 2021-56, a bylaw to appoint a building inspector, plans examiner for the town of Wasaga Beach, Tracy Jarrett. 2021-57, a bylaw to amend Town of Wasaga Beach Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw number 2003-60 as amended, Haymount Investments Limited, Block 24, Plan 51M 923. 2021-58, a bylaw to authorize the entering into of an agreement between the Corporation of the Town of Wasaga Beach and Sterling Homes, Westbury Road, Inc., for the deferral of the payment of development charges associated with the property outlined on Schedule A of the attached development charges deferral agreement dated August 28, 2020. 2021-59, a bylaw to amend the Town of Wasaga Beach Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw number 2003-60 as amended, 81 Berkeley Street. 2021-60, a bylaw to authorize the execution of a lease agreement, 31 Beach Drive, Unit A. And 2021-61, a bylaw to authorize the execution of a license agreement with Rogers Communications, Inc., 950 River Road West. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And confirmatory bylaw, a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Wells and Deputy Mayor Bray. Resolved that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Wasaga Beach at its regular meeting held Tuesday, June 29, 2021 be received and be deemed to have been read a first, second, and third time, passed and numbered 2021-62. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon and happy Canada Day.
Happy Canada Day.